We're about to study page 125. Before we go to our subject, I would like to share with you some of the word of a great Torah commentator, Rabbeinu Chaim ben Attar. It was a great rabbi, a holy man that wrote the commentary on the Torah. His name is Ora Chaim. That's the name of the commentary. His graveside is in the Mount Olive in Jerusalem, and he's considered one of the leader commentary in the past generation. And he wrote at the very early part of Parshat Chukat, the Torah portion dealing with the law of red heifer and the law of Tum'ah. The reason I would like to share it with you is because today part of our study focus not only on the issue of Muktzeh, which is part of the Daf, something that's set aside. We're also going to discuss a lot of phases in Hilchot Tum'ah v'Tahara, the law of ritual purity and impurity. So Or Chaim HaKadosh said, there is a reason why when it's come to a corpse, dealing with a dead body, we treat it as a highest level of impurity. Why is that? So he goes a little bit to the world of Kabbalah, which tells us that upon departure of the soul from the body, it's a process taking place. I think in a contemporary manner, the best source is the book called The Bridge of Life, Gesher HaChaim, by Rabbi Tikochinsky, who tells us that there is 7 stages in the process of burial. So there are forces that is called Kochot HaTum'ah, the forces of impurity, and there are the others, which is the forces of Kedusha, the forces of holiness. The whole Chayut, the whole sense of living creature, of all these source of evils, for impurity, it's Yonkim, it's come from the source of Kedusha, source of holiness. It means when a person fulfills a mitzvah, but not in the proper way that it should be, that deficiency get caught by those forces. And instead of going to details, I just abbreviate his words, and he said, upon a burial, we believe, when we do Zibula Achrita, when we reach the final stage of burial, we said a special Kaddish. Is the first one is the Aramaic Kaddish, and we believe at that time the soul fully departure from the body, which means from now on the physical body that go to a process of decay has only the nitzotzot, the sparkle of the soul. And therefore, he said, at that time, all the other forces come in to that corpse. In allegorical matter, it's like a mashal, it's like an example. The rabbis tells us, if you take a big barrel of honey, field of honey, so when it's sealed, it's filled of honey. You can pour in, and then it's sealed. But upon emptying the barrel, now is nothing left. What do you do with that barrel? You throw it to the trash. And what's happened to all these little, whatever it is, little sparkle of honey? all these flies come in and yonkim. They are basically now living toward whatever left over from that burr. So my dear friends, today part of our discussion is going to be Tum'ot Shratzim, dealing with the 8 type of species that carry a special level of impurity, ritual impurity, and we're going to juxtapose several halachot in that manner to our discussion. And our discussion is continuation of all these perek, the Hilchot Muktzeh, the law of something that's set aside on Shabbat. We explain in a simple way, especially for those who watch us first time. When we're dealing with Muktzeh, it can be, for example, a hammer. We just use it several times, so it's easy to describe. There are different type of hammer, there are different use, and we explain that there is difference between letzorech gufo, letzorech mekomo. If you have the hammer on your chair, you need to move it, you cannot. If you need the hammer to break a nut in order to eat is another story. If you have a hammer that used for muktzeh mechamat chisaron kis, which means they use that hammer for a professional, for example, goldsmith, so you are limited of using it for that purposes, otherwise you denigrated the value of that hammer. So all of that is the halachot of muktzeh, and all the derivative point, which is the concept of basis ledavar asur, that something has the foundation of something that is forbidden, and then the issue when and where and how we can carry on Shabbat. 125, the top of the page. אמר בר המדורי אמר שמואל, קרומיות של מחצלת מותר לטלטלם בשבת. This rabbi said that if you have a clay that seal into a big trash dump while it is still day, which is before Shabbat begin, so it is prohibited to move it on Shabbat. And with regard to a shirt, where you have those pieces of reeds that separates from a mat, which means that you have machzelet yeshana, it's an old mat, and then you have those pieces that separate. So he said mutar letaltelam, you permit to move them on Shabbat. My tama, how come we said that you can move them? We just discussed yesterday the whole concept of muktzeh, something that's set aside. So how come you're allowed to move them? So he said, Amarava bar Hamduri. That's an idea that bar Hamduri said on behalf of Shmuel. Asberali, he explained to me as follows. Machzelet gufa lemay chazia. A mat itself, for what use is it suited? Which means, Rashi tells us that if you need, for example, to cover a dust, let's say you have a child that unfortunately deliver his feces and you need to cover it. So you don't want to have this big mess. So you take this mat and you cover that, and you want to avoid that, or you want to avoid dust that's coming around. So the Rif said that usually they use in those days mat for sitting purposes. So he explained, Hanename chazyan lechasuyei behu tinofet. So that here too, they are ready to do what? To cover something that it's a disgrace. So Tosfot tells us here that this mat has several purposes. It's either because it's to cover that spot that it's a disgrace, or he holds that it's like you carry a vessel and it's not considering part of set aside, part of muktzeh. אמר רבי זרע אמר רב, שיערי פרוזמויות אסור לטלטלן בשבת. If you have pieces of a remain of cloth, so you cannot carry them on Shabbat. Here you see also indirectly the historical concept of living in those days. For sure, in every society, since the ancient time, there are people who are wealthy and there are people who are poor. So, people who are rich, what do? When they have a cloth, they have a garment that was tearing apart, what do? They buying a new one. However, אמר אביי, במטלניות שאין בהם 3 על 3. Those small clothes that they do not have the area of 3 by 3 finger breadth, which means דלא חזיין לא לעניים ולא לעשירים. These small pieces of cloth that is a 3 by 3 finger breadth, you cannot suit it neither for the poor nor for the wealthy. So as we explained, the wealthy buying a new one. The poor, it's a so small that that they don't use. Now, the Vilna Gaon and the Ritva as well tells us that here they use those matliot, those clothes for purpose of mitzvah. Whatever it is, soon you see examples. So he said it's very incongruous, it's very inappropriate to use this type of cloth for other purposes but mitzvah, such as something that is disgrace, something that carry the odor, whatever it is, cover the dust. It's inappropriate to use that designate for mitzvah for those purposes. So now you see here, in order to clarify, we are now dealing with a Noseh Mush'al. It's a different subject, but soon you see the correlation to our subject. And the subject is using an old, a very old oven. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis tells us, Shivrei Tanur Yashan, Harei Hen ככל הכלים הניטלים בחצר, דברי רבי מאיר. Rashi tells us that those old oven, the older they get, what happened with them, they become a stronger and very hard, mitkashim, and you can use it for certain purposes. Why? Because think about an oven that used many times. Those pieces in there are like get used to the heat, and they are very unbreakable in that sense. So here we bring an example of that, a old oven. So he said that the share of an old oven may be moved in a courtyard on Shabbat, like all the vessels that may be moved in the courtyard on Shabbat. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Some word of introduction, and soon you see the connection to a previous discussion. Rashba first tells us all the idea of tumat beged, the law of impurity, and he elaborates with the whole previous idea, which is the 3 by 3. And in a very similar manner, Rabbeinu Nisim Daran brought on the name of the Ravid, and he said that here we're speaking first, the previous example, when we're dealing with cloth, it's speaking not just a cloth, but something like talit, like in Yiddish talis. You use this talis for kedusha, for the sacred reason, such as, what are you using talis for? You're using the talit katan, to have it as part of the underwear. Use the talis for the Beit HaKnesset, for the synagogue. We have a public talitot. Now, that talit designated for sacred purposes. So the Ran brought in the name of the Ravid that it's very inappropriate to take that talit and use it to cover a feces from your little baby, a little child. If that child make a mess, so you cannot take the talit and cover it. Now, the Ravid said that if the size of that talit is less than 3 by 3 finger breadth, which means that it's ein chashivut, it doesn't carry the importance of a regular talit. So you have some thought of leniencies. The Mechaber, the code, said in Shin Chet, Seif Yud Gimel, in 308:13, he brought and he said, V'yesha matiri, there are those who are more lenient, and he meant to say the right. Now back to our subject. When we're dealing here with a old oven, so Rabbi Meir hold that you can use it like all the others, small, like all the vessels that we move in the courtyard on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, en nitalim. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, you cannot do that. So soon we elaborate and you see the connection. Ha'id Rabbi Yossi, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, על שברי תנור ישן שניטלים בשבת ועל כיסויו שאינו צריך בית יד. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov tells us that Rabbi Yossi said on behalf of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and as a side note, Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's something that Tosfot tells us later that we go in Balacha by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So he said that the shard that of an old oven that you need to move on Shabbat and about its cover, which not require a handle, which means you don't have those handler that you can use it, because in the old days, in the Talmudic time, they have those stoves that the opening is at the top of the stove, so they make those special cover in order to keep the heat in the proper temperature. So after you put together, you glue that part of the door, then you cover it. That's what Rashi said. So here you see something that we're going to study Mitzvah Shem tomorrow in page 126 in the Mishnah. There is a machloket, there is a disputation in regard to cover those vessels. If you need those handler in order to carry them or not. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is more lenient in that matter. And over there the GEMARA will give us the reason for that disputation. So now we go to that disputation here between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in regards to Shivrei Tanur Yashan, if you have those broken pieces from old oven. B'mai kamifligei, what exactly the machloket, the disputation between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? Amar Abaye tells us, Be'osin me'ein melacha ve'ein osin me'ein melachtam kamifligei. Abaye said that with regard to shard, with their serve some function, but not serve a function similar to their own original function, that point they disagree. Ve'az da Rabbi Yehuda letame, Rabbi Yehuda go by his way. He holds that it's considering as a nolad. We explained many times that nolad meaning something that was quote unquote born on Shabbat, and therefore you cannot carry that on Shabbat. I don't know if you remember, but when we studied Beya, when we studied the tractate of dealing with egg that come out of the chicken on Shabbat, it's a muktzeh, it's set aside, and is the issue, we cannot carry that. So in that sense, it's a nolad, it's something new that was born. But Rabbi Meir letami, Rabbi Meir hold that since those pieces already were there in advance, excuse me, because they are there earlier, So he said that it was like set up, it was ready, and you can carry them. So, meaning that the first Tana in the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and here in the Braita it's almost analogous to the way we have it in the Mishnah. And he said, so therefore, what we learn? Yesterday we studied, if you remember, yesterday we dealt with a Shivrehem Nitalim Imahem, that those broken pieces you can carry together with them. As long as you have what's called Me'ein Melacha, some part of there some function. For those of you who would like to see the practicality, let me share with you some examples. Let's say you have a plates, Magash Perot, you have a plates that carry different fruits. Now, you want to use now that piece, instead of fruit, you want to use it as a serving tea or hot tea as a plate. So again, that plate was designated for what? For fruits. Now you want to use it for other purposes, for tea. So if you go by the way that Rabbi Yehuda said, Me'ein Melacha. So if you have this designated for fruits, you should put the different fruits there. Otherwise, he said that that's muktzeh, that's set aside, you cannot do it. But the sages, I meant the other idea, the Rabbi Meir hold that it's the same as they preparing in advance for that carrying, and it's not that, he doesn't hold that issue. Matkif la Rava, so Rava strongly objected that, and he said, if you tell me that specific situation, ad miflegei beshivrei tanu, liflegei beshivrei kilim be'alma. Why you need to tell me that we're dealing here specifically with oven? Why is the oven? If you have it as a plate, you can use that plate for any other purposes, for cake, for anything you like, for fruits. And since that, what's the difference? Why it has to be something that coming out of an oven? Ela amar Rava. So Rava came in and he said, Beshivrei dehai tanur kamiflige. We are talking specifically about specific stove. Ditnan. There is an important Mishnah in Tractate Kelim, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. Netano al pi habo או על פי הדות ונתן שם אבן, רבי יהודה אומר, אם מסיק מלמטה והוא ניסוך מלמעלה טמא, ואם לאו טהור. So the Mishnah said, if one place it over the mouth of a pit, which is again the Talmudic time, you have this oven and you have down below the fire. So you put the stone on that corner to keep the heat coming straight inside that that stove. Does anybody have these GEMARA with the English explanation? Can someone please help me with reading? What did they say in your...
It says the ancient oven consisted of a large earthenware...
Can you raise your voice so everyone can hear you, please?
The ancient oven consisted of a large earthenware cylinder shaped like a bottomless pot that was ordinarily placed on the ground. To facilitate the retention of heat, clay would be applied to the entire outer surface of the oven from top to bottom to thicken its walls and to form an airtight seal where the oven met the ground. A fire would be lit on the ground inside the oven, and a pot would be suspended above it, or dough would be plastered to the interior oven wall. The Mishnah cited here deals with a case where a person did not place the oven on the ground, but suspended it in the opening of a pit or cistern, using a stone to wedge it in place. Thus, the pit or cistern would in effect serve as an extension of his oven, which has no bottom of its own, and the fire would be lit at the bottom of the pit or cistern. The cistern we're dealing with is shaped like a pit, but is an above ground structure.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going by the way that the Chazon Ish, the great Rabbi Karelitz, explained in Kelim, chapter 7 in his book. And here is the way that he holds. He said that this Mishnah said that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is if one hits the oven from the beneath the oven, inside the pit, and the oven was heated to the top, so what happened here? So it's carried the purity because it's from the bottom and go up, and the stone on the side is just helping to keep all the temperature properly. However, the sages the sages said, "V'chachamim omrim, ho'il v'usak mikol makom tameh." So he explained, so since it can be heated in some manner, which means that anyway you can heat it, so therefore he said that it's a tameh, it's impure, because he explained, the Chazon Ish explained, you do not have to have this stove attached to the ground in order to receive a ritual impurity. So therefore, there is no difference between oven that you can heat from the ground, from this pit, and a regular stove that you need to heat from itself. So here is the source. Ubemai kamiflige. Now we need to elaborate that disputation. And now we go to the law of impurity. If you remember, we discussed a little bit impurity at the introduction. You see that there is a lot of implications in that. The Torah said in the book of Vayikra, book of Leviticus, chapter 11, pasuk, sentence 35, Tanur vechiraim yutatz, tmeim hem utmeim yiyu lachem. The Torah said, and everything upon which any part of their keres falls shall be impure, whether oven or stove, it shall be broken in pieces. They are impure, and they shall be impure to you. So again, here we're dealing with Tum'at Shratzim, and you have this 8 type of Tum'at Shratzim, that those creeping creatures that the Torah designate, and they say that they carry impurity. So if any one of these 8 examples the Torah used touch a vessel, so it becomes impure by this attachment. What do you do with that? In order to purify it, what do? You go to a mikveh for dishes, and you duck it in the mikveh. Now what happened if it's made out of cheres, of the earthware? So what happened is, we said, shvirato hi taharato. Since the earthware is only absorbed, but not desorbed, which means, if you look at the way that the earth were made, it's only accepting, but it's not something that you can use even the heart of the oven to pull out whatever it's absorbed. It's absorbed and not desorbed. So the Torah used the word yutatz, which means the only way to quote unquote purify that earthware is to do what? Boom, to break it. So that's, they said, utmeim yiyu lachem, which means you cannot purify them. So Rabbi Yehuda hold that the word yutatz means you need to break it. It's applied to a stove mechustzar netitza tameh, because the stove, the oven, is attached to the ground. So therefore you can do netitza, you can do the idea of breaking it, and therefore it's impure. But if the oven is detached, she'ein mechusar netitza, that you cannot fulfill the whole idea of yutatz, meaning to break it, tahor, so it's pure. V'Rabbanan savri, but the sages hold, because the Torah said the word tmeim yiyu lachem, they will be for you impure, mikol makom. Since the Torah said twice, tmeim and tmeim yiyu lachem, they repeated twice, So even if it's not attached to the ground, like the way that the old oven was, so it's accepted the impurity even if it's not attached to the ground of that pit, and you can heat it from there. V'Rabbanan nami haktiv yutatz. How the sages respond to that? Since in the Torah use the word yutatz, you shall break. So it means that specifically oven that is attached is the one who accepts ritual impurity, only something that it's attached to the ground. So the GEMARA responds, Hahu le'idach gisa. So it's not to be lenient in something that it's a detached, it's go the opposite way. Here you have Rashi that use the word klomar, and we explained many times that when Rashi used klomar, he meant something. So in my book, Biurei Klomar Berashi al Hashas, I elaborate, explain at length the meaning of that Rashi. To give you just the key idea here, the GEMARA wants to tell us, Rashi said, and that's the reason I believe that he used the word klomar, it's because here we go the other way around, that we want to express stringencies when it's come to the attached oven, and they want to teach us that it is also capable of receiving impurity. And the meaning of the pasuk, it's not lema'et, to reduce and to take away a oven that is a detached, because you cannot do the nutats, you cannot break it, because the Torah said twice the word tmeim, that it be impure. So they're going to teach us that also an oven that it's not attached to the ground, it still receive impurity. And that's what Rashi wants to emphasize, that the pasuk is lerabot, to teach us that even a oven that is attached, or detached, both receive impurity. Again, the Chazon Ish in the Kelim 7:24 elaborate on that at length. The Salka da'ata chamina, that you may think the opposite. Kevan dechabre be'ara kegufa de'ara dame kamashmelan. What are you thinking? Because it's a part of the ground, so it's like attached to the ground, it's part of the ground, and you'll not receive impurity. Why? Because in the entire Torah, what we said that something that it's attached to the ground, so it's not receive any type of impurity. So here the pasuk come and teach us stringencies, and said even that it's attached to the ground, so all the hits hold. So what do you think? So something that it's metaltel, something that is carried from one location to another, for sure it's accept a impurity. So now they use the word yutatz, that even it's attached to the ground, it still carries and this contagiousness of the impurity. Ve'idach dame, and according to the second one, which is Rabbi Yehuda, haktiv tme'im yhu lachem, the Torah said that it will be impure to you, which means that the pasuk wants to tell us also an oven that is a detached. So the GEMARA responded and said, "Ahike de Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel." The Amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, מחלוקת בהיסק ראשון, אבל בהיסק שני אפילו תלוי בצוואר גמל. He said the whole disputation between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is specifically with regard to the first lightning. The first lightning transformed an earthenware oven that did not yet completely dry into a vessel. However, with regard to the second lightning, they did not disagree, even if it was hanging around the camel's neck. since it already been fired up once, it's impure. So they just bring an example of extreme. And now they crystallize that point. Amar Ula, the great rabbi, the name of Ula, elaborates on that, and he said, Vehesek Rishon, and the first stage of heating, Lerabanan afilu talui betzavar gamal. When we are heating an oven, first time, and let's say if it's up in the air, ba'avir, so the question is that considering an oven or not? If it's a earthware, if it's a cheres, so lo mityabesh, it's not become dry, because it doesn't have the capacity to be dry. How you dry it? So there are two ways. One, it's called hesek mibefnim. You put that part inside the oven and it's dried. Or hesek mibachutz, that's come from outside. So here Rabbi Yehuda hold that if you do it from outside, then it's received the tuma, the ritual impurity. The Rabbanan, the sages hold that if it's outside, for sure it's received impurity. It's not even a question. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda hold that this type of oven, it's considering in a vessel, even when he is complete, is not broken. So therefore, those pieces that was broke, they do not carry the same Torat Kelim, the same halachic status as the regular vessels. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda said that those pieces that were broken, we cannot carry them on Shabbat. And Rabbi Meir hold the same as the sages, that they hold that that oven is considering as one vessel, and therefore those pieces that was broken, those pieces broken are basically a broken vessels, and therefore you're allowed to go ahead and carry them. Matkif la Rav Ashi hold a very strong objections. Ihache, if that's the case, ademiflege b'shivrei tanur lipalgu betanur gufa. Since you tell me that there is a machloket, it's disputation in regard to pieces that come out of oven, let them have this disputation of the complete oven. Hashta tanur gufa leRabbi Yehuda lo avemana shvarav mibaya. Since Rabbi Yehuda hold that this entire oven, it's not considering a full vessel, so do you have a question in regards to the broken pieces that you tell me that they are in the law of muktzeh, of set aside? Ela amar Rav Ashi leolam kede'amaran me'ikara. So the truth is that the Braita hold that those pieces are ready for the original need, which mean that if you take a regular stove that you have some pieces that earthware that was broken. So what do? You take that piece and you use it for other purposes. For example, you bake with that. So he said, all of that going to teach us another disputation between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which is be'oseh ma'aseh tapka, which means here you're dealing with a situation that someone crafts a ceramic board. It's called takpa, in Hebrew re'afim. That the way that you make it, imagine that you have an oven and part of that was broken. So you take this straight plate and you use it as what? As like magash leuga. You want to serve a cake, you have that plate. And another thing is, you put it on a very bottom of the oven, and that's used to heat the oven. So Rabbi Meir, dvarav de Rabbi Yehuda kamar, Rabbi Meir hold that we should allow this type of broken piece to carry from one location to another. Also according to Rabbi Yehuda, and he explained, Ledidi, according to my way of thinking, afilu she'osin me'en melacha, that even that they do something that it's not really the designation of that type of labor, but it's still considering a kli, a vessel. Ela lididach, that you hold that there has to be to the original designation of type of labor. You may come to conclusion and agree with me that you take this tapka, this re'afim, that piece, and what do? You said that you cook with that. It's like me'ein melacha, that you're allowed to carry it. Rabbi Yehuda sover lo dami. Rabbi Yehuda said that you cannot compare them. Why? Over there you heat it outside of the oven, and inside the oven, and over there you heat it outside of the oven, which means under the earthware. Hatam, when the oven was completed, which means they used to put those dough pieces in those corners, and those dough was cooked like pitot. You put it me'umad, like standing. Hachalav mumad. But here, after it was broken, so the dough is not standing like straight, it's just lying on that earthware. So therefore, those broken pieces, you cannot use them the same as the original intent when you use this full piece of oven, and therefore you cannot carry them. Conclusion: He'id Rabbi Yossi mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yossi testified on the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov al shivrei tanur yashan shenitalin b'Shabbat. For those pieces of earthware that you can carry them on Shabbat, ve'al kisuyo, and the cover part which we discussed earlier, she'en tzarich beit yad, that you do not have to have this something that hold it like a handle in both sides. Amar Ravina. So the Gemara come and tells us, Ravina, keman metaltrina leidna kisude de tanuri, the Mata Mechasya. It was a city in Babylon that's called, famous city, Mata Mechasya. So how in our days, meaning in Babylon, how do we carry those cover of those ovens? The ein laim bet achiza, that it doesn't have any handle in both ways, and we're going to explain in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow in page 126b the details. Keman Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So the Tosfot tells us here that we go by the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which means we go always, the halakha, it's kav v'naki, it's clearly by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that everywhere you see his opinion, we follow halakha according to his opinion. So therefore, that's the way we go in a practical halakha. Now we go to the next Mishnah. Excuse me. The Mishnah here dealing with any type of muktzeh, the item that's set aside, that it's attached to some vessels that it's not muktzeh, and they're using both together. Example: האבן שבקיורה, אם ממלאים בה ואינה נופלת, ממלאים בה, ואם לאו, אין ממלאים בה. Here, they said a stone that is in the ground used to draw water. And so imagine, for example, if you have dlat. You know what is a dlat? It's like large, it looks like a yellow melon, but it's a big one, have a lot of seeds, right? So imagine if it's empty and someone used that to go to the old times well and pull out water. You cannot. But what do you do in order to make it happen? You take that dlat, that fruit, and you put a stone inside. So now tell me what happened. You take this dry fruit, dry dlat, large one, looks like a large watermelon, the yellow one, and it's empty. You put inside a stone, and now it's carry a weight. You put it down in the water. So the Mishnah said, as long as the stone is attached very strongly. So that stone, it's not considering a kli, it's not a vessel, and it's considered basis ledavar asur. Why? Because that's the foundation for something that is forbidden. So therefore, what happened? You cannot carry that. It's asur betiltul, because you cannot carry it from one location to another. So therefore, you cannot do that. However, zmora, we just turned the page to 125b, continuing of the Mishnah, zmora shehi kshura betafiach. If you have a vine branch that is tied to a pitcher, so he said, memal'in ba b'Shabbat. You may fill water with it on Shabbat because the branch becomes part of the vessel. As we said, because when you hold it together, it's already part of the vessel. It's not detached. Now we go a little bit in history. In the Talmudic time, the window was using the windows in different way. Nowadays, when you need to open a window, you have those tzirim, those corner part that you use to open and close the window. In an ancient time, they used to have a window shutter, which makes the window sometimes either dark or you see the light. It was like a plata, like some shadow that hold the window, and that's that way. So it's called pkak hachalon. So Rabbi Eliezer omer bizman shu kashur vetalui. Rabbi Eliezer said when it is tied and hanging from the window, which means it's not touching the ground, pokekimbo, one may shadow the window with it. Why? Because it's not considered building. It's not the idea of isur bone. The Khatam Sofer explains to us in his explanation of this Mishnah that the whole idea of using it and considering it as a bonus, as some type of building, it's in a situation that you tighten it together. But the sages hold, ben kach uven kach pokekim bo. Both in this case, because he holds bin lav and pokekim bo. If not, touching the ground may not shadow the window with it. But the sages said both. In the other case, one may shadow with it. So the idea is, later we explain in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow, that according to the sages, you don't need to tight that window shadow, because they hold if you do it in a temporary manner, so it's not considering a melechet boneh, the labor, one of the 39 labor, which is the building. Now we elaborate of the first clause of the Mishnah. If you have a stone that is on top of the barrel and one wants to open the barrel, so what did he do? He tiddled the barrel on the side and the stone falls. And he said, Amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Yami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu elo beshocheach. Here we talk only in a circumstance that someone forget to put that stone at the top of the barrel before Shabbat when it's a twilight, and it wasn't in his mindset, in his da'at to do it. Aval b'maniach. If someone intentionally put it before Shabbat, na'asa, that barrel became basis ledavar asur, a foundation of some type of work that is forbidden, and therefore you cannot carry it. Great Rabbi Akiva Iger explains that since it's the foundation for that stones, so that's basically the item that hold that muktzeh, that's something that's set aside. So because it holds it in such a way, you put that stone to cover that barrel, it means that the muktzeh, the set aside, serve the barrel, and the barrel is not serving the the muktzeh, the set aside. So it means by that if we talk about the second clause of the Mishnah talk about lifting up that barrel. But in the first part, when it's setting it aside, so you can put it and move it, even keep your hold, even you do it with the full intent. Because otherwise you have a very serious contradiction between the Rashi here and Rashi in the 142b that said the opposite. Anyway, back to our subject. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela b'shocheach. We specifically talk about someone who forget. Aval b'maniach nasa kisui le'achavit. But if he left it there, it's already become a cover for the barrel, and it's permitted to use it like other barrel covers. Amar Rabbah said, Motivnan am ashma'atim. We ask of what we heard from the word of the Mishnah. Ha'even shebakiura, im memal'im ba ve'ena nofelet memal'im ba. If you have a stone that on the ground used to draw water, so if they fill it with the water and the stone does not fall, one may fill it with on Shabbat. So they said, in that case, you cannot compare, because there in the case of the stone in the ground, since one attached it to the ground, he rendered the stone a wall of the ground and part of the vessel, unlike the situation of kisui, that the stone is at the top of the barrel. Amar Rav Yosef u'motina v'ashma'atim. We can ask that because we said that this a vessel that we hold here in the case of the stone from the continuing part of the Mishnah, im lav, when we're pulling out that part and the stone fall down by itself, en memal'im ba, we cannot fill it up. Why? Because the whole idea of that stone becoming a vessel, it's because you can use it, but if not, so if you put this stone on the very bottom of that barrel, it's not considering a kli, it's not considering a vessel. Veloi, and it's not a question to what we said earlier. Hatam over there, kevan de lo hadka batulei batla. Since he did not attach the stone to the ground, he negates its status as part of the vessel, and it remains muktzeh, it's set aside. But in our situation, so it's enough to put the stone on the bottom of that barrel in order to make it as a cover. B'mai kamiflegei. What's the real machloket? Now we're going faster. I see the signals that we're getting a little longer than usual. Excuse me. Ma Rabba, in the name of Rabbi Ami Sava Bainan Maaseh, in order to make this even, to make it as part of the vessel, you need to have this type of action. You need to do something with the goof of the oven, or such as, for example, you make it straight, or you clean it up, right? So, or you tighten it. Umar, Rav Yosef, name of Rav Asi, hold lo ba'inan maaseh. You don't need to do it. It's enough that you put it at the top of the barrel. Ve'azu letamei Rav Ami and Rav Asi hold. When Rav Dimi came to Babylon, Amar Rabbi Chanina, he said, name of Rabbi Chanina ba'amrela, Amar Rabbi Zeira, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Pam achat alach Rabbi lemakom echad. Rabbi went one time in a Friday evening, umatza nidbach shel avanim. He found this type of bricks setting on the ground and ready for building. ואמר לתלמידיו, צבו וחשבו כדי שנשב עליהם למחר. He said to his students, set up those bricks, be ready for sitting, so tomorrow, which is already Shabbat, we can use it. ולא יצריכן רבי למעשה. He doesn't need to make an action in order to prepare them. רבי יוחנן אמר, יצריכן רבי למעשה. רבי יוחנן said, yes, he needs to have this action. מה אמר לו? What did he tell them? רבי ימי מרצו ולמדו, אמר לו, he told them that they should set up those stones, those bricks, so they can sit without need to carry them on Shabbat. He told them that they just need to brush them or prepare them so they will be ready for sitting. So they two opinions. One said, Rabbi Yossi Bar Shul said that it was a new stack of beams, not stones. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul said it was a sounding pole of a ship used to determine the depth of the water. How do you call that? This water?
Sounding pole is correct. That's basically you just have someone standing on the front of the boat with the long pole. They stick it down till it hits the bottom and it has marks on it, so then they know what the depth.
We need to have a boatman to
and then they call the depth off to the skippers in the back of the boat, so they know what they're seeing. So.
Thank you. What do we do without you? מאן דאמר גשוש כל שכן סבר. ומאן דאמר סבר אבל גשוש כפיד עליו. So the one who said that you need to have the sounding poles, all the so more that he permitted doing so in the case of beams, and one who said that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi permitted sitting on the beams, but the case of sounding poles, so he is prohibited. Which means that gashosh, as the particular about it becoming wrap and damaged. So they said here, Zmoashi Kshura, just the last part of our study. Zmoashi Kshura, we said in the Mishnah that if you have a vine branch that is tied, so if you have this vine branch that is tied to a pitcher, so one may fill the water with it on Shabbat. So the GEMARA inferred and said, Kshura ein lo kshura lo. You tell me that it's only in a touch, if not, it's not, so we have to say that the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Tanya. Charayot shel dekel, if you have these hard branches of a palm tree, שגדרם לעצים ונמלח עליהם לישיבה, that one cut it off for what? For firewood. And you need it for the construction of the fire. And then what happened? He decided, he changed his mind and he reconsidered their designation and decided to use them for seating. So what do you have to do? צריך לקשור. He must tie the branches together on before Shabbat, so that they will not be muktzeh, they're not set aside. Said, you don't need to tie it. It's enough that you have machshevet, you have in your thought, that you're planning to have it for sitting, that you mafkia, that you already annul, you abrogate the whole idea of muktzeh, set aside. So because the Mishnah not allow us to carry this type of vine branch, only if he tied it, which means that the Mishnah doesn't hold the same as Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. אמר רב ששת אפילו תמר רבן שמעון בן גמליאל לחמה עסקינן במחוברת באביה. That you have to say that this, it's a vine branch, it's connected to its origin, to the origin, the vine. יחק המשתמש במחובר לקרקע. So now you have a new problem, which is you're using something that it's attached to the ground, so it doesn't help if you prepare it in advance before Shabbat. So they said למטה משלושה, if it's below, then three handbreadths of the ground. So a vine that attached to the ground below 3 handbreadths of the ground was not prohibited in that decree, just as permitted to make use of the tree root adjust to the ground. So Ravashi Amar afilu teimat lusha, even you tell me that it's detached, gzera shema yiktom. We put a new decree that one less cut and strengthen the branch to prepare it for use with the bucket. So that's called makeh bapatish. Remember we talked about makeh bapatish? Because that's the completion of like final stage of hammering something, and therefore it's forbidden. Last part, we said in the Mishnah, pkaka chalon, when you're dealing with a window shutter, and we said in the manner that one permitted to shutter the window on Shabbat, Amar Rabba Bar Chan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hakol, which means both Rabbi Eliezer and the sages hold, hakol modim she'en osin oel haray betchila biyom tov, ve'en tzarich lomar b'Shabbat. Everyone agreed that one may not construct a temporary tent on a festival for the first time, and for sure it's needless to say that it's forbidden on Shabbat. Lo nechelku, the only disputation is in regard ela leosif, which means to add for some temporary tent to something that has already existed. Rabbi Eliezer omer en mosifin biyom tov, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that you cannot add it the temporary tent, even on a festival, ואין צריך לומר בשבת, that's needless to say in שבת, והחכמים אומרים מוסיפים בשבת, ואין צריך לומר ביום טוב. החכמים said, the sages said that you can add on Shabbat, if Shabbat is much stricter than Yom Tov, so for sure you're allowed to do it in Yom Tov. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, if it's come to that mat, you cannot open that mat, that what is a little bit open before a day, and the sages said that you can do it. So the same ways that Rabbi Eliezer and the sages disagree with something that it's a temporary roof, so they also disagree in regard to add of the permanent partition, the same way that Rabbi Eliezer hold that is forbidden, to add something on the roof that made temporarily, the same way you hold that you cannot add of something that is a permanent, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, anything that you cannot do lechatchila at the first initio, you cannot add. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer forbids to add something, even of something that is permanent, even tosefet aray of something that it's just temporary. Today in a practical halacha, I suggested that whenever you have time, you should go to Shulchan Aruch Shinchet 308 to see all the specifications. We just give you the abbreviation, the vignette. Krumiyot shel machzelet. If you have a shreds of reeds that separated from a mat, it is permitted to move the remains of a mat on Shabbat, even from the sun into the shade, because they are suited for covered field. That's this is ruling even if remain are smaller than 3 by 3 finger breadth. The minimum size a rag must be in order to be permissible to move it on Shabbat. If they were thrown away before Shabbat, it is prohibited to move them, because by throwing them away one is set aside like muktzeh, thereby preventing their use on Shabbat. Matlaniyot she'en b'hem 3 על 3. On Shabbat is prohibited to move rags that are smaller than 3 by 3 finger breadth in size, as part of the opinion of the Abaye. Magen Avraham said he permits moving rags even smaller than 3 by 3 finger breadth because they are usable. If the rags are the remains of the object used for a mitzvah, for example, talit, a prayer shawl, it is prohibited to use them, and we explained in doing the shiur the whole idea why. Now, shivrei tanur yashan, if you have a pieces, broken pieces like shard of the old oven. So the Magid Mishnah said, and this is the Rambam Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 26, it is permitted to move shard of an oven on Shabbat if they can still be used in a manner similar to the way the oven is used. This is according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, to whom an attribute Mishnayot are generally attributed, and the opinion of Rabbi Yosef and the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and we explained that we go by the Mishnah on Kav Venaki. Al Kisiyo, about its cover, so it is permitted to move vessel covering on Shabbat, even those without a handle. It applies only to objects that were already used to cover vessels. That's the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Afilu talui betzavar gamal. If you remember, we used the idea of camel necks, which is an oven that is not connected to the ground, even just for exaggeration, for understanding. Even one hanging around the neck of a camel, which means up in the air, can still become ritually impure like any other oven, as the opinion of rabbis in the Mishnah. We show it in the Tractate Kelim. Ha'even shebakiura, a stone that was in the ground used to draw water. It is permitted to use a ground to draw water from a well if the stone inside it to weight is down is firmly attached and will not fall out when filling the ground with water. If the stone will fall out, it is prohibited to use the ground because the stone is muktzeh, it's set aside. Also we learn about the one who forget, בשוכח, במניח, one who plays. So that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 309. If one forgets a set aside, a muktzeh item upon a vessel, for example, a stone at top of a barrel prior to Shabbat, and then wants to take wine from the barrel on Shabbat, it is permitted to tilt the vessel so that the muktzeh, that set aside item, will fall. If one places the set aside item on the vessel with the intention that it remain there after the start of Shabbat, it is prohibited to tilt or to shake the vessel, because the vessel became a base for a prohibited object. That's the Rabbi Yochanan. Some authorities, that's the Rambam brought in the Hilchot Shabbat 25. So he holds that he permits tilting the vessel even if one places the set aside item on the vessel with the intention that it remained there after the start of Shabbat. That's go only if his intention was to remove it on Shabbat. If he intends that it remain in a place for duration of Shabbat, then the vessel become a base of a prohibited object, and we explained that's basis ledavar asur. How about nidbach shel avadim? We said that a course of building stones. We said that if one may not sit on stones designated for construction, even if before Shabbat he thought to utilize them. However, if one arranged the stone before Shabbat, it is permitted to sit on them. That's the according to Rabbi Yochanan, who explained of Rabbi Ami. Some authority, that's the Magid Mishnah and the Rema. Rema is based on the Magid Mishnah, and also the Rif and the Ran and the Rosh. They hold that they permitted to use them even if he merely thought to use them before Shabbat, which is the halacha in the case of a palm fronds. And again, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 308 dealt with that. Now with the last halachot of today, let's Hashem. He said that zmora mechuberet, if a shoot is tied to a bucket, one may utilize the bucket to draw water. However, if the shoot is not tied to the bucket, then it's prohibited to use it unless the person sever the shoot and attach it to the bucket. How about temporary tent? It is prohibited to build a tent on Shabbat or on festival, even if it's temporary. The definition of temporary tent in this context is a structure with a roof. Constructing permanent, significant partitions, such as, for example, on the festival of Sukkot, you creating the walls of a sukkah, is also prohibited. However, it is permitted to build temporary or insignificant partitions, for example, partition establishing for privacy. Or it is permitted to add a temporary tent, for example, if one who partially spread at least one handbreadth of a tent like covering before Shabbat, so he is permitted to extend it. And that's Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 22, and Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 3:15.